Kjellberg, and I am a proud product of the USD 305 in Salina, Kansas. I love democracy, and in my other hats I wear, I often support the Kansas Farmers Union and other things. I've been to Topeka and had a great chance to talk with Senator Hill, and I think we're just here to have a great conversation. I do want to reiterate that I understand that everyone is under a lot of stress and has a lot of feelings about what's happening, but today we have a great opportunity to be here as Kansans and sit and have a conversation, and I really hope that that's what we can do today.
Thank you, Sheila. And kind of what we're going to do, if you picked up cards when you came in, you can fill out a card and with a question or a comment, something you want me to talk about. But before I go any further, though, I see Representative Clark Sanders came in back here. Clark, wave your hand. Thank you so much, Clark, for being here. Appreciate that. Yeah, why don't you? I'm gonna have Sheila talk just a little bit about who I am, how I ended up sitting in this hot seat chair up here, and then I'll go ahead and start. I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing in the legislature and give you a little bit of an update.
All right, Senator Scott Hill was born in Lewistown, Montana. He actually attended a one-room schoolhouse all the way up until 7th grade. So I think you're probably ready for what happens in Topeka. You're used to a lot of noise and carrying on if you're doing all that in one room. He graduated summa cum laude from K-State University with a BS in animal science. He's named Farm Bureau Outstanding Young Farmer back in the 90s when he got his start. Elected to the Kansas State Board of Education in the 90s as well. Served on the Sand Springs local board of Education in 2000. He has a master's degree from K-State University. He also has a graduate certificate in applied statistics from K-State. All right, I see a lot of the other purple happening here, but we're gonna let it slide. We're gonna let it slide. He has a doctorate in philosophy in animal science, also from K-State, and he's currently was elected to Kansas House of Representatives, 70th District from 2022 and 2024, nominated by the precinct election of Kansas Senate 24 District in 2025. He is married to his lovely partner, Lynette, where they have 2 daughters, Catherine and Melissa, and 6 grandchildren. And I have to tell you that when I was in Topeka a couple weeks ago, Senator Hill definitely was in poppy mode too. I saw a grandson that was there with his trucks, and I mean, it was just a great testament to bringing your family where you are and keeping them in the forefront.
Thank you, Sheila. Do you mind if I stand up? I don't want to tower over people, but I have a hard time sitting still, especially when I'm talking about things that are passionate to me. The state of Kansas is passionate to me. The city of Salina is passionate to me. The county of Saline County is passionate to me. Dickinson County is passionate. I believe in who we are as a people in Kansas. We are a people, and you know, we like to emphasize our motto. And if you look on our license plates, what's it say now? The new license plates? It says "To the Stars," but the rest of that motto that gets left out is "To the stars through adversity." And you know, we don't live in the most gorgeous scenic area. We don't live in the most productive agriculture area. We don't live in an area that has the best weather year-round, that you can wake up and it's going to be 72 degrees every day. We got dumped with a little bit of snow last night, and we weren't expecting that. But what we do have is a people that are resilient, work to solve problems, and probably more than anything else, care about each other. And you know, I haven't lived in Kansas all my life. I have lived in Kansas all of my life that I truly enjoyed. In other words, I've lived other places, but there's nothing like Central Kansas. And so it is the great honor of my life to be able to represent the people of Central Kansas in this Kansas legislature and now in particularly in the Kansas Senate. This year has been a really new experience for me working in the Senate, because instead of working with 125 people, I'm working with 40. And every one of those 40 people is absolutely critical to getting legislation passed. And so with 125 people, it's really important to have your caucus work together. And it's really important for your leadership to understand what's going on. In the Senate, with 40 of us in there, it's really important to establish relationships with every one of those 40 people. And so it's been a great experience to do that. I will tell you, I'm exhausted by the end of a week. We basically go from 7 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night, Monday through Thursday, and then I try to be in the district and talk to people on Friday and Saturday. So I took a day off yesterday. Sheila talked about my grandkids and the great joy of being married for 40 plus years is having grandchildren. And my wife's grinning back there, but it is the great joy of our lives. And to be able to take a day yesterday and go see our grandchildren in Minnesota and make it back here this morning, actually it was the day before yesterday, we drove back yesterday, was awesome. Then we got home last night and my 11-year-old granddaughter was climbing in a tree in snowy Minnesota, and the branch broke and she fell out of the tree and broke the socket of her shoulder. So she was in the emergency room last night, and I think she's going to be okay. But you want to be there. You want to tell them that it's going to be okay. So let me talk just a little bit about what's happening in the legislature right now. I serve on 3 committees in the Senate, and the first one of those committees that meets in the morning is called Financial Institutions and Insurance. And that's kind of cool because we have some appointments that go through that committee, and we recently had 2 appointments from Salina that went through our committee to be appointed to state boards. And so Peter Johnson, who some of you may know that works as legal counsel for the hospital here in Salina, is now going to be serving on the Board of Regents, which is really a great honor for him. And it's a great honor for Salina to have somebody on the Board of Regents. And then a few days after that, we got the nomination of Darren Craig, who is the president of Bennington State Bank here in Salina. Has a really cool story how he worked his way up, never went to college, never finished college, but just worked in the bank, and they recognized his talent, and he kept working up, and now he is the president of Bennington State Bank, which is a very large bank. It has offices in Salina, but also in Topeka, and a whole bunch of communities in between there. So that was a great honor. One of the things that came through financial institutions and insurance was a PBM reform bill. Now, for those of you that don't quite follow all the acronyms, which I don't always follow, PBM means Pharmacy Benefit Managers. And the pharmacy benefit managers are one of the most wealthy sections of our healthcare industry. There are essentially 3 large pharmacy benefit managers in the country, and each one of them is making in the tens of billions of dollars. And in the meantime, our local pharmacists this is the 2nd year in a row that they have made the effort, which one of them just walked in the door, by the way. Thank you for being here, Sandy. Our local pharmacists are struggling. And this is the 2nd year in a row that they have taken off time from work and have come down to Topeka to talk to us about reform in the way we handle prescriptions. And fortunately, we were able to get that bill through the Senate this week. And what we found out was that when you have tens of billions of dollars, which the pharmacy benefit managers do, and the insurance companies that they are connected with are making tens of billions of dollars, they have a lot of money to lobby. And we got hit really hard by lobbyists for, I don't know, 2-3 weeks, a month. But when it came down to the votes, the people in the Senate held strong, they listened to reason, and they got that bill through. Now, some of you are hearing about a pill tax. You've probably heard some, did you get something in the mail that says there's going to be a $10.50 pill tax? And so instead of paying $2 for your prescription, you're going to pay $12.50 or $12.70. That is absolutely not true. There's already in the pharmacy benefit manager system, there is a prescription fee. And this standardizes the prescription fee so that it is the same for all pharmacies, whether you are owned by a pharmacy benefit manager or not. So what you will see is no change in your cost of prescriptions. They will stay the same. But the pharmacy benefit managers are going to have to start to show everybody where their money's coming from, what they're paying for prescriptions, and what they are charging you for them. So that's something that came out of that committee. I'm going to cruise over the next two and get you, so you get kind of a feeling of what we work on and what we do. The second committee that I serve on is judiciary. And not being a lawyer might be a disadvantage on that committee because a lot of the language that comes in is all in lawyerese. But I think it is good to have people on there that are just plain talking old farmers, because we ask the questions of what does this really do? And some of the things that we're really working on is crime in Kansas. And what we know is that as we have been more focused on getting the drug trade stopped and addressing crime issues in our communities, that crime is going down. However, we find there are bills that come before us that identify loopholes. One of those is a situation down in Wichita where a father, and this is really a horrific situation, a father killed his 2 children and then kidnapped his other 2 children. He killed the boys and took the girls with him. And when he was captured and incarcerated and brought to trial, he said that he was incompetent to stand trial because of insanity, which is fairly easy to understand if you just killed 2 of your children. But through the process of being evaluated and treated, evaluated and treated, evaluated and treated, he was never found to be able to be competent to stand trial, but he was found to be okay to be released to the community. And so we passed some legislation that for those very serious crimes like that, that's not an option. You need to make restitution or be tried for your crimes before you can be released back into the community. Another loophole that we encountered was from a case over in Manhattan, Kansas. Horrible case of a chiropractor that abused and assaulted his patients. 19 different women came before our legislature and gave their stories. And they weren't able to do it much better than I'm able to talk about it right now. And when the trial was over and he was found guilty of 51 counts, instead of being retained in the prison and incarcerated, he was allowed to go free along with the women that had just testified against him. And he didn't have to come back to court until he was sentenced. And so we said, that's not right. It was extremely emotionally distressing for those women. And it's not right that he should be free knowing that he's going to be incarcerated for the rest of his life, essentially, that he should be free that last couple of days to do whatever he wanted to. A very bad situation. So we passed a bill that addressed that. We also If we have any job as a government, it is to protect the rights of citizens. And when I say that, I mean that. The first thing that we have to do in our society is to protect those that need protection. We passed a very controversial bill this last week that was designed to protect young women, young girls, from having people in their personal spaces that are traumatic to them. And there are people that see that very differently than I do. But I have an 11-year-old granddaughter. And when she goes into a restroom, I don't want her to encounter a biological male in the restroom. Now, I understand that people want to use the restroom of their choice. But each of us has spent our life picking the restroom that we will go to. And I have occasionally made a mistake and walked in the wrong door. And I will tell you, that's a very uncomfortable situation for me. And I about break the door down going back out. And, you know, my wife will tell me, and hundreds of other women that I have talked to tell me that it is very uncomfortable for them to have someone in their restroom that is a biological male. Now, we passed a bill, and it is the law in Kansas now, that public buildings in the state of Kansas that have multiple occupancy restrooms, so that's not a single occupancy restroom, but multiple occupancy restrooms will be designated by biological sex. And the people that go into restrooms that are not their biological sex can be fined. Okay? This, for many people, this is very common sense legislation. For other people, they see it as hurtful legislation. It is not designed to be hurtful legislation. It is designed to protect the privacy of individuals. And we will see. We will see how that works. But I know that 1 in 4 girls are assaulted before they become adults. I know that each of us know women that have been assaulted, and when I say assaulted, being exposed to someone in a restroom, it qualifies as an assault. And even in the testimony before the legislative body, the number was brought up by someone who did not support the bill, was on the other side of the issue. They brought up the number that 1 in 120,000 people will be assaulted in a restroom. Now, when you think about that, when you take that number, it sounds pretty big, doesn't it? 1 in 120,000 people. There's 60,000 people in Salina. That means every 2 years, someone will be assaulted in a restroom. If we can eliminate those 2 lives that are destroyed by that, it is worth it. And so I think one of the things that we always look at when we look at legislation is, who does it hurt and who does it help? And I believe in the case of Senate Bill 244, which I'm talking about, the number of people that it helps greatly outweighs the number of people that it hurts. Okay? Now I want to talk just a little bit about economic development and finances, because that's something that affects all of us. It's one of the major things that we talk about in the legislature. And I want you to know that Salina is a great example of economic development. And one of the things that Salina has taken the approach of is that we need housing for people to live in before we can have workers, before we can have jobs, before we can have economic development. And we have benefited from the Kubota plant on the south side of town here. They have invested $400 million in Salina to add manufacturing capacity. And I visited with their CEO about a week ago, and he said the key reason we were able to do that is that there is housing in Salina that can accommodate a workforce. And so when you see housing going up all over in Salina, know that that is the key attribute for economic development. And we also have numerous new businesses going in out at the airport. Downtown Salina is booming right now. And we're about to, hopefully, if everything goes well, we're going to have a rejuvenation project out at the Central Mall. Now, some of those projects have been brought on by Star Bonds, and Star Bonds used correctly work wonderfully because they bring new business into your community that didn't exist before. That's the idea of a Star Bond, and a portion of that is paid off by the sales tax generated by the new business. And I want you to know that the Central Mall project out here, there's a Star Bond issue with it. I mean, coming up with it, there's a Star Bond component of it. But what people forget to realize is there's also a private industry component of that is in the neighborhood of $70 million that somebody is investing in that property out there to turn an aging and out-of-date facility into something special. And I think that will be a great investment in Salina. I think it will continue to cause Salina to grow. Now, one of the things that I have focused on my 4 years in the legislature has been that taxes are too high in our state. Because when I walk doors and when I talk to people, I hear over and over again, property tax, property tax, property tax. And so a primary focus for me in the legislature has been the reduction of taxes. And since I have been in there, not just because of me, but myself and a lot of people like me, we have reduced taxes in the state of Kansas by over $1 billion. We have done that by eliminating sales tax on food, which affects every one of us. It particularly affects the working poor, which is the group that we should be most concerned about in the state. Because if we are to provide opportunity for anybody, it should be the working poor. We should provide them with an opportunity to live their life and to improve and to get better. And so reducing and then eliminating the sales tax on food was a big help on that. We also did something to help the working poor out in that we increased their standard deduction on income tax, and we also increased the amount that they can deduct for dependents. And so it has moved the level that you start paying income tax up to, I think it's like $32,000 or something like that now. So that helps out the people that are working but don't have a lot of income. The third area, and probably the most important area that we are still talking about, is property tax reduction. Last year we got the state of Kansas out of the property tax collection because we collected a $2 million statewide property tax for funding of buildings. And we decided to eliminate that. Now, the rest of property tax that you see is collected for schools and for local government. There are ways that we can encourage local government to be efficient in the way they use money and reduce property taxes, but really from the state, we have to focus on education if we want to reduce property taxes from the state anymore. Now, I am, and other legislators are committed to fully funding education. We have been doing it for 5 years now, that we have funded according to what the Supreme Court said was the appropriate amount for education. And that was not easily arrived at, but after about 8 years of litigation, the Supreme Court came up with a number and said, this is what you need to do to fund education. So everybody says that's fully funded. I say it's fully funded according to what the judicial system says, okay? Now, the other component of education that everybody talks about is special ed. And most of you probably don't know this, but special ed is near and dear to my heart. I have a younger brother that is who he is today because of a special ed program. He started in special ed at 6 years of age and was in it all the way through high school. He's a functioning, disabled adult today because he received skills through special ed. So it is near and dear to my heart. I've voted for special ed increases numerous times in the legislature. But I want to put a caveat in there. We need to do better. And we need to do better by redesigning our formula of how we fund education. And I have been fortunate for the past 2 years to be on a select committee that is determining what the funding formula for education will be in the future. And we need to fund our public schools, but we also need to encourage our schools to do better. We're not where we need to be. Our math scores have gone down for 2 decades. Our reading scores have gone down for 2 decades. As funding has gone up, scores have gone down. We have to do better. And it came to the realization of the legislature that about 30% of our kids were graduating from high school illiterate. That is simply unacceptable. We have gone from one of the top 10 literacy states in the United States to one of the bottom 10. And we've done that in 20 years. And we've done it not because of funding, not because of the hard work of teachers, not because parents want it. We've done it because we are using a flawed system of educating in reading. And about 3 years ago, we started going back a long ways to looking at what really is the way that kids learn words and learn language. And you know what? They don't learn words and language by guessing at them. And yet we taught that for 20 years in our schools. That you looked at how the structure of a sentence went and you guessed if you didn't know the word. And now we understand that kids need to understand phonetic awareness in their heads. They have to be able to phonetically put words together. It's common sense to a lot of us because a lot of us were trained that way. But the younger generation, the young people today, most of them were not. And this is an oversimplification of what I work on in Education Committee. But we need to have phonetic awareness, we need to have sentence structure understanding, and you know what else we've learned? We also need to reduce the use of electronic devices in our schools. And this year we are working on a bill that will eliminate cell phones from schools during the day. And I have introduced a companion bill to that reduces the amount of screen time that kids are exposed to in a day. And these are not things that are brought out because I'm an old-fashioned farmer that just doesn't understand. These things are brought out because of research that very intelligent people have been conducting for a number of years now that show we learn differently and inferiorly. Inferiorly? Is that a word? I might have just made up a new word, Sheila.
Right, it's your town hall.
Yeah, okay, inferiorly. We're going to use it. at a lower rate when they learn off of a computer screen versus out of reading a book. A lot of us felt that intrinsically. Now we see the evidence coming out, and it's not even close. It's about half the retention rate of when you read from a book versus reading from an electronic device. And I could go into a lot of the research on it, but this one thing you take and remember. When you look at a computer screen, that word is at a certain spot on your computer screen. And when we learn how to read and how to understand information, we compartmentalize it by remembering where it came from. And so if you look in a book and you're reading through it and you remember that on about the 12th page, at this point in the page, this information was contained, that's how it goes into your brain. When you look at a computer screen, that information moves all over in the screen, depending on which time you access it. And so the retention of information coming off of a computer screen is considerably less than it is coming out of a book. Education, as you probably guessed by now, if I'm talking about it, is my passion. And my passion is that we have a generation that grows up in our public school systems that does better than the generation before them. Hopefully, as we look at things through a scientific approach, that happens. I've talked a lot up here. You guys have been sitting there listening very quietly and wonderfully. When I asked everybody to come here, it was to have a conversation. Right now, it probably seems a lot more like a lecture, right? So I'm going to give you an opportunity to, and we've got cards here. Do you have some cards that have been collected, Sheila? And we'll go through, here's a bunch more right down here. We'll go through some of those. I'll talk about them in a conversation manner. And then if we still have time, we don't have to be kicked out of here. We'll just open it up to talk some more, okay? Thank you.
Thank you so much. All that talking let me organize these cards I have. And if you have any more, please feel free to set them up here. I want to make sure if it's relevant to the question I'm asking, we can kind of organize them all. While we're doing that, I have to admit I was a little nervous about this, and I may have sat in on a classroom management class earlier this week just in case things got a little wild in here. But hats off, you all are behaving very well, and anyway, and you're lovely. Your speaking gave me time to organize some cards so we can go ahead and get started here. And I kind of tried to do it in maybe the order that you were speaking earlier. And what better thing to start off with than a thank you? So this is not a question, but a thank you. Thank you for your input at the Senate meeting this week regarding Senate Bill 360. The pharmacists in this community appreciate your support and your kind words about our profession. And this was a special thanks from Maddie Livingood. So I thought that was really pertinent that you were up there talking about it, and there was a card specifically thanking you for your understanding and willingness to support your constituents. Okay, here's another thing. You know what? You must be good at listening to people here. Here's another one right here. This says, I am concerned mainly about making sure all citizens are able to vote and about federal overreach and constitutional redistricting and poll taxes, aka driver's license and IDs being required. What do you hope to do to protect Kansas's free and fair elections?
Great question. Yeah, thank you for that, Sheila. It's a great question. And before I go into that, talking about thanks reminded me that I haven't thanked KW yet. And, President Thompson back there, thank you all for allowing me to do this. I mean, I don't get the chance to talk to people unless I have some place to do it. And we try to go around and we try to talk at restaurants and different places. But it is awesome to have this facility and the warm reception I've had here. And I do have the purple tie on, and it was indicated that it might have something to do with K-State. It might, but it might have something to do with Kansas Wesleyan too. And the way this school has grown and the leadership that's been exhibited here to make a difference in this community and a difference in these kids' lives that come here. I wish we had more of them here, because I'd like to hear what are issues for them. But I understand their lives are busy. But a special thank you, and a thank you to Sheila, thank you to Greg for filming this. I really appreciate the support that I had here to get this to come off, so thank you. Now I forgot what the question is. Oh, voting thing. I think every one of us wants to have every citizen possible to vote. And one of the things that's really concerned me is that when we have off-year elections, we get an abysmal voter turnout. We don't have a great turnout, period. We need to do better at getting the people that are actually registered to vote to show up to vote. I mean, that's low-hanging fruit. People that are registered to vote. Now, there's a lot of talk in Topeka about making sure that only citizens vote, because that was in this card, that every citizen should vote. And I agree with that. I agree wholeheartedly that we should have every citizen showing up to vote. I don't agree that non-citizens should vote. I don't think that's according to our legal structure in our country, and I don't think anybody really wants that. But it is a challenge to figure out how we make it easy for people to vote, but even more importantly, that they get engaged in this process. I think that's the conversation we really need to have. Out of a town of 60,000, this is a nice turnout, by the way, for on a snowy morning. I will tell you that all of my colleagues in the legislature will go to meetings and they will get 15 people show up. They'll get 20 people to show up. It is hard to get engaged with citizens. It's one of the reasons that I write a column every week. It's one of the reasons I try to be at every event I can be at. But both sides need to work harder on this. Many of my colleagues don't work very hard about getting out and talking to people, but there's a lot of people that don't work very hard about getting out and talking to their representatives. In the preamble of the Kansas Constitution, it says that all power is vested with the people. And people need to remember that. And they exhibit that power by being here, by being in the ballot box. So, great question.
You talked about this a little bit earlier, but this question is specifically talking about protecting residents' rights of people and some of our more marginalized folks here, specifically referring to the LGBTQIA and trans folks that you represent.
Absolutely. I think everybody's rights need to be respected. But we have to remember that everybody's rights means everybody. And so when I talked about earlier that we have an obligation to protect the privacy of people in private locations, in locker rooms, in showers, in restrooms, everybody's rights need to be protected. Not just the most vocal rights, but everybody's. And so, to me, that means that we figure out ways to accommodate all individuals. Now, does that mean that a biological male should be in a biological female restroom or locker room or shower? I don't believe they should. I think this legislation that we passed that says they should not be, I agree with that. And, you know, I wonder in our society if anybody really thinks that that's a good idea, because it shouldn't be, especially when we do have what I would say, of crime that we still have real problems with. Sexual assault is one of the worst issues we are. In property crimes, we're doing really good. In murders and physically violent crimes, we're doing really good about getting those numbers down. I just heard recently that the number of burglaries to steal things is at a low since 1954 per capita. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that we're doing really good in educating and reducing crime. I don't think creating situations that can lead to assault or lead to uncomfortable encounters is a good way to improve sexual assault situations.
I think just to circle back a little bit about that question, and I think you briefly touched on it, just to make sure I answer the full question. Do you propose anything that would be able to protect those folks that deserve to use a restroom in public spaces?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think the solution to this situation is having more single occupancy facilities. And I think we should be encouraging that in new building construction and renovation in old buildings. I mean, I guess I'm kind of a private person myself, and I actually really like restaurants that have single occupancy restrooms. You know, that what's happened, like if you go into a modern locker room in a lot of athletic situations, they'll have privacy for individuals to dress and to shower and things. I think privacy is best accommodated by having single occupancy structures.
Thank you. Just to continue on with Kansas safeties and concerns, this is a question. We are concerned about ICE actions in Kansas and its creation of climate of fear and legal immorality. They're just wanting to know, what can we do to protect citizens and legal immigrants from harassment and infringements in due process?
Yeah. Thank you, Sheila. Great question. And you know, I had a little bit of a conversation with somebody, I don't remember who it was now, before we started here, about the importance of immigration in our country. And you know, I think the noise of illegal immigration right now has overshadowed what all of us depend on, is legal immigration. And you know, I've got a friend, and this is, you know, a total side note, but I've got a friend that contacted me a while back here. He's from Germany, and he wants to immigrate to the United States. And I went through looking at the process of how you do that, and it's almost impossible. It's almost impossible to immigrate from another country legally to the United States. And I look at that and I go, who have we become as a country that we don't accept and encourage immigrants to come here? You know, I'm looking around this room. You know, I'm just making a wild guess that most of us have ancestors that immigrated to this country. I know I did. On both sides of my family, there's immigrants, some of them not too far back. And, you know, when we talk about America being a land of opportunity, you know, that phrase doesn't get used as much as it should. But that's why people wanted to come here. That's why our ancestors wanted to come here. Is it still a land of opportunity? Well, I believe it is. I believe the structure and what we believe in, that we believe in government run by the people. And one of the really unique things about our Constitution, I'm a Constitution nerd, and so I spent a lot of time looking at the Constitution. One of the unique things about the American Constitution is that all rights that aren't specifically taken away from you are given to you. And that's both from the federal level and the state level. And we don't even think about that because we grew up in this country, most of us. But I will tell you, I travel around the world. I've been in lots of different countries, including China, and they don't take rights for granted in China. Let me tell you, when we go to visit there, they say you have more rights in our country than we do as citizens. And we need to realize that in our country, we do have rights. And those rights are protected by our federal government and by our state government. Now, ICE was brought up in that, and I don't think they were talking about what we saw on the road this morning as we were driving around. I think they're talking about a law enforcement agency. You know, law enforcement agencies should never be above the law. You know, we just passed, and ICE is a federal agency that the state really doesn't have a whole lot of control over, okay? But we just passed a law out of the Senate that says surveillance cameras on utility poles can't be there indefinitely. Because law enforcement likes that, right? They can surveil an area and they can be watching people all the time. You know, I grew up in a country that I believe that people should do the right thing even when they're not being watched. And so I think it's imperative that we have strong law enforcement in our country, but I think it's also imperative that strong law enforcement does not infringe on our constitutionally delivered rights.
Thank you. The next question is about something that I think Salina has done has been a great example of, downtown Salina, and there's some others across the state that might not have been. But Kansas uses star bonds to create regional economic activity. And this question is, what happens if the project fails? Is the city or state liable? And what comes of that?
So the way star bonds work, and this has been a huge topic of conversation for the past couple, 3 months, and primarily because of the Chiefs Stadium. And I will tell you, disclaimer right up front, I did not vote for the star bond usage in the Chiefs Stadium. I felt like it was a corruption of what the star bond was designed to do, and I thought the opportunities for financial success out of that were definitely not limited to the holder of the bonds, but were limited to the Kansas people. And you know, when I got elected not to support large businesses and super wealthy people, but I got elected to support the people that show up at our community affairs, the people that I walk down the street and talk to. That's who I got elected to represent. I didn't think the Chiefs star bond fulfilled the obligation of what a star bond's supposed to do. Now let's talk about Salina, because it's a very different thing in Salina. The way downtown Salina was invigorated with the use of star bonds has brought people from outside of the Salina region into downtown. Wonderful hotels to stay at in downtown Salina now. Some really nice shops and businesses down there that have attracted people there. That's what star bonds are supposed to do. What gets lost in the whole discussion on star bonds are that it is designed as a tourist attraction. That's what they're for. And if they bring people in from outside of your area and produce new economic activity that would not have been there before, it's a win-win, because that new economic activity produces more sales tax revenue that goes to pay off the star bonds. So what happens when a star bond fails? Well, there's been a number of them in the state that have failed, so we don't have to really wonder what happens. The holders of those bonds end up losing the money that's still owed to them. So when a star bond is issued, somebody buys that bond. Sheila, if you had a few $1 million that you didn't know what to do with, and you know, yeah, you go and buy a bond because it has a return on it, a guaranteed a guaranteed return on it. If the developers of that entity, whatever it is, like over in Kansas City, it was the Slitter bond that people know about. If the developers of that entity are not able to pay the bonds on time and go into default, the owners of the bonds then own the property. Okay, in the case of like Slitter bond, you went from a property that had some value when it was functioning to when it's not functioning, it has almost no value. And so the holders of those bonds are basically in default, and they're not going to get their money. They might get a little portion of their money back, but they will not get all of their money back. So just like any other bond that is issued, if the issuer of the bond does not fulfill the terms of the bond, whoever bought it will lose the money. And that's how it works. The state of Kansas, and this has been put out there, that the state of Kansas will lose money if a star bond defaults. That is not true. The holders of the bonds will lose money, not the state of Kansas. The state of Kansas has very little liability, and I say that slowly and cautiously because the Chiefs Stadium is a little bit different. In all the other star bond projects, the state had no liability. I am not convinced that the state doesn't have liability in the Chiefs Stadium project. I think, and that's not really what the question is, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think we became very starry-eyed about having the Chiefs in Kansas, and we as a legislature approved something that should have been thought about a whole lot more before we did it. And that's why I voted against it originally, and when the reauthorization of it comes before us this year, I will vote against it again. And that will be a very unpopular vote because, you know, there's a lot of people who want the Chiefs here, but I just don't think it's well thought out. Do you remember to give me the microphone?
I know we've got to share here. Let's see, I think I have a few more questions, and then we're going to move into some questions regarding rural healthcare and healthcare in general and education. And then I think we'll wrap it up after that point. And like I said, if you still have questions right now, please let me know, and I'm happy to weave them in. This one is just a little specific to it. It says, if Muslims try to set up a community, are you going to try to get Congress to stop it? There's no more context, so
This is a really emotional issue for a lot of people, because if you look around the world at what Muslim nations are like, particularly strict Sharia law nations like Iran. Iran's in the news a lot. We just saw that they slaughtered, I don't know, thousands and thousands of people that spoke out against the regime. So this is a very emotional issue. I think you have to look at, and any issue that comes before me, I try to look at it and say, what does our Constitution say? What do our laws say? And, you know, one of the foundational concepts that America was founded on, you don't have to go very far. You get through the Constitution, you get to the Bill of Rights, and what does the first Bill of Rights, the First Amendment to our Constitution say? It says that you will have the freedom to practice your religion. Now, does that give you the right to stone young girls? Does it give you the right to stone somebody caught in adultery? Absolutely not. So I think what you need to balance on this question is, you should be able to worship as you see fit. And I could go into an entire dissertation on the First Amendment, because I think it is essential in our country and was the foundational concept that the Pilgrims came here for. It's the foundational concept that the Puritans came here for. It's the foundational concept that numerous other religious groups came to America because they wanted to practice their religion without interference by the government. That does not allow them to do things that break the laws of our country. And so the question actually has a balance in it. Of course, Muslims should be welcome in America. You know, I as a Christian think that Muslims need to see the freedom of Jesus Christ in their lives. You know, I believe that. But that doesn't mean that I have the right to tell them how to worship. I mean, we're sitting in a Kansas Wesleyan University that was founded with the idea that we should be able to train young people up in our religious faith. I mean, that's what it was founded for. And that is an idea that we have in this country, that we should be able to do that. But that doesn't give you the right to murder, maim, and destroy people. It doesn't give you the right to take away people's rights. And so there is this balance in our country that we always have to remember. I'm not threatened by Muslim immigrants into our country. I am threatened by Muslim immigrants into our country that are here for the reason to maim and kill. So, I mean, all immigrants that are here, and I think I can get agreement on this, that immigrants that have come here to do harm to us and are doing harm to us should be underneath United States law. They shouldn't be able to do illegal things, hurting people, murdering people. That's not acceptable. But the other side of that is, if you're an immigrant here that's legally here and you want to build up this country, you want to build up your family, I can talk about 1,000 stories that I've heard of people that came here and sacrificed and worked long hours, low pay, saved every dime they could so that they could support their family and build up a heritage for the next generation. And you know 1,000 stories too, because everybody in your community has those stories in their background. You know, we didn't just magically become a wealthy nation. We became a wealthy nation because we had laws that protected people's desire to improve their lives. And then when they did that, we protected their right to own property and to accumulate wealth. And those are things that oftentimes people look at. I'm really going off on a tangent here, but this is it's an important thought. People look at those that have wealth, and I was doing some research this morning on Massachusetts, because Massachusetts enacted a law that those that make over $1 million have an additional tax on them, 4%. I mean, it's not a huge thing. I don't think those people were probably terribly concerned about that. But the idea behind that we should look at those that have wealth and be envious of it, to me is a fundamental flaw. I say that societies are built up through two things that none of us really like: greed and envy. Because if you think about it, when you've got $1 million and you want to get $1.5 million, that's kind of greed, isn't it? But if you have $1 million and you want to steal $1 million from somebody next to you, that's envy. And I think we have, as a society, have rewarded greed in the past. And I think there's a lot of people that want to reward envy today. And it's important to remember what your motivation is. Is your motivation to see all people better off? Or is your motivation to be able to take something from someone and give it to somebody else?
All right, well, we're
I
going
see
to...
another question came in.
Yeah, you know what? I do have another question. It's on the lines of healthcare, which is what we're going to start talking about right now. So what do you see the role for the state playing in stabilizing rural healthcare systems, and not just through direct funding, but through reimbursement programs, doctor retention, and others that affect the rural hospitals?
This is a huge question, and I think a really, really important question, because many of our rural hospitals, and by the way, Salina is considered rural. Did you know that? Our hospitals here are rural hospitals. Many of the rural hospitals in our state are on financially precarious footing. And the reason they are, I mean, some of my Kansas City people tell me this, the reason they are is because we're losing population out here. So, I mean, there's a whole nother side of a way to answer this question about how do we establish rural economic development, which is probably even a more important question. But where we're at right now, we need to protect rural health care. Because if we don't have rural health care, there's no opportunity for rural economic development. Because nobody's going to move to a community and have children when they have to drive 150 miles to be in a maternity ward. I mean, it's just an understanding of services that need to be available. You know, what we talked about this earlier. I'm looking over at my pharmacist friend. You need to have pharmacies in communities too. And you need to have other services like grocery stores. You need all of those things. But the federal government came up with an idea this year that they would give money to rural states to help bolster their rural hospitals. Now, is that a permanent fix? I don't think it is. I think it is a Band-Aid approach, but we need a Band-Aid approach if we're going to keep our rural hospitals open. And then we need to be looking at what the long-term approach is as well. And I think repopulating rural Kansas is a huge challenge, but also a huge opportunity. How many people today that are 20 to 30 years old would love to live in a rural community and raise their children in a rural environment? And I will tell you that if you look online and you look in chat rooms, that isn't a few, it's a lot. And we should not ignore that opportunity. You know, if we look back to why was Kansas settled in 1861? Why were people in Kansas at that point in time? Well, you know what it was? It was really simple. It was free land. The Homestead Act populated the central United States, and by the way, I grew up in eastern Montana, which is one of the least populated areas in the United States, and it was populated by the Homestead Act. People filed homesteads all through eastern Montana. Some of them survived. My ancestors survived. Many of them did not. But it populated the communities. I think we need a bold idea, and I've talked to Sheila some about microagriculture. I think we need a bold idea that starts to get people back into our rural areas, back to where they can raise their children, back to where they can be a part of a community that is small enough they feel they're a part of it. Because, I mean, it's one of the things we're experiencing right here, right now. People don't come to a meeting like this because they don't feel like they're part of the government. If you have 200 people in your community, you are a part of that government. You're a part of that community. And I think it's something special. I feel my opportunity to grow up in an extremely rural area and go to a one-room school where there was I never had another person in my grade, by the way. I was always tops in my class. I didn't, when I got to a bigger school like K-State, I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to be, so I just kept doing that. You know, that's a unique opportunity, and more people should be able to do that. More people should be able to experience what rural Kansas is like and what rural Kansas people are like, because they're some of the best people in the world. And we need to expose them to that. So I don't know if I answered that about rural health care. I will tell you the Community Health Center here in Salina is an amazing facility. They're getting a new building. You know, my wife and I were talking about doctors that had been influential in our lives, and doctors that we would consider to be wonderful friends and wonderful influences in our communities. And almost every one of them was a general practitioner. And yet, our society has really gone away from general practitioners. Everybody wants a specialist to look at them, not trashing specialists. I probably got, if there's a specialist in the room, no insult intended. But general practitioner doctors traditionally cared about the person and the family they came from, and what was going on in their lives. And they served on the local community boards. They were part of the community. We should be encouraging general practitioners to move into rural Kansas.
All right, well, there are a few more healthcare related questions, but I do love your passion for our rural communities, and I think that is definitely the backbone of Kansas. I think we need to definitely be looking at how to support them. This question is specifically to the federal changes with vaccines, and it was just how do you feel like Kansas needs to respond to the changes to vaccines made at the federal level?
Well, you may not have figured this out by now, but I have a little bit of a libertarian streak that runs through me. And I suppose some of that comes from me growing up in an extremely rural community. But I believe people need to inform themselves. They need to inform themselves about the vaccines that are critical for their children's health, for their health, and they should participate in the vaccines that they see are right for them. I don't think, you know, as I look at the Constitution and I look at the state Constitution, I don't see the provisions in there that the government's supposed to make everybody's decisions for them. So the federal government saying they're going to require less vaccines, I don't have a great concern about that. I think people are smart enough to know what vaccines they need to take, and they take them.
This next question is related to several House bills that have passed. It says the House passed 3 pro-life bills, HB 2635, HB, is that a 2727, HB 2129. How will you vote, and will the Senate pass these bills? In HB 26, this person provided a little background information for anyone, but HB 2635 protects PRCs. HB, is that 2727? Informed consent enforcement, and HB 2729, women's right to know.
Well, those of you that have heard me talk very much, and I've visited with many of you in person, know how passionate I am about life. And I think that's a really broad statement. But, you know, I use the example of I'm sitting up here right now, and I'm talking to you, and occasionally have a bit of intelligence in what I say. But, you know, I could have a heart attack in the next 30 seconds, be on the floor, and my body's exactly the same. Same composition. My body didn't change in composition whatsoever. But I'm definitely not uttering anything intelligent at that point in time. So what's different? It's that mysterious thing that we don't really know what it is. but it's life. And being a reproductive physiologist, I spent my scientific career working with life. And I've watched it from every stage. The stage from a single cell before it becomes a diploid. I've watched it develop in utero. I've watched the results of conception and like many of you, praised conception and looked forward to birth. That is life. It is also life when we're 90 some years old and we're breathing out our last. And I believe that all of the way in between there, we can do nothing better than encourage and protect life. Because if we don't do that, how can we expect to do anything else good in our lives? If we don't believe in the fundamental concept that there's something amazing and intrinsic about being alive, if we don't believe that, how can we do anything in this world that amounts to anything? I am absolutely committed to the idea that we have to glorify, encourage, and respect life above all things. Now these bills, I haven't studied them. I'm not gonna make a judgment on them. But I will say this, that in the state of Kansas, our Supreme Court has looked at our Constitution and looked at the wording that says, by the way, to protect the liberties of life, pursuit of happiness, and liberty, that those are the key components of our government. They looked at that and said it's okay to take unborn life. Now, I understand the political pressure that caused that to happen. I understand that women want autonomy over their bodies. I understand that that is a right that they feel strongly about. But I also believe that an embryo in a woman's uterus is life. And all of the components of life are there. You know, one of the most amazing things, if you had the opportunity to do a lot of the research and analysis I have, but watching what happens with an embryo when it quits doing the divisions, cell divisions. So it starts out, it's one cell, and it divides to 2 cells. And then it divides to 4 cells. Each time it doubles, right? Because each one of those cells divides into another one. And then it's 8 cells, then 16 cells. And then it comes to a stage where it's called differentiation. And those cells decide what they're going to be. You ever think about this? It's not, from the beginning, they were all exactly the same. Every one of those cells was exactly the same. And then there is a decision made, and this happens early on in a pregnancy, where one of those cells says, I'm going to be the spinal column. And it starts to take on characteristics of bone. And another cell says, I'm going to be a nerve. And it starts to take on the compositions of nerves. And another cell says, I'm going to be flesh, and it starts to do that. And this is an oversimplification, okay, what I'm saying here. But when you watch that happen, and you say, how does that happen? How does this cell decide it's going to do that, and this cell is going to do that? You tell me that's not intelligence? You tell me there isn't an intelligent being there from the very beginning? And that there isn't a life there from the very beginning? So the answer to your questions is, I will always support the idea of life because I believe in it. And it's central and passionate to who I am. What does that mean as far as passing laws in Kansas? I don't know. I dream of the day that everybody respects life. I dream of the day that we don't have an abortion debate because children are wanted. If you look at our population decline in Kansas, it's about 20,000 human beings per year. Incidentally, we abort about 20,000 human beings every year. We should want each one of those children.
Actually, that's a great segue into talking about education, because part of bringing children into this world is, ensuring that they're able and have access to the education they need to thrive. This question is, I'm going to do my best to read this person's handwriting, and I can give you the card if there's a little confusion, but 75% of our kids in the state of Kansas are in AEP. In
an IEP?
In an IEP, yes, an IEP. Okay, familiar with that. What can the legislator do to bring more accountability to the schools? And then there's 3 questions here, so I'm going to read them all because I know you get passionate. So I'm to make good use of everyone's time and the questions I have. Okay, question number 2 is special education funding is, and there's co-op. Like there's a co-op here, and I think this person is wanting similar access to the folks in Dickinson County. They're having to come over here to receive services, and they're just wanting to know how can legislator provide an overnight fix to maybe some of those folks struggling in Dickinson County, and then a long-term, so a Band-Aid and then a long-term. And I do apologize if I'm not doing the best job answering this question, but I'm going to give it to you just so you can.
Okay, that's an awesome question, because, by the way, services for special education kids, the idea of it doesn't come from the local level, doesn't come from the state level, it comes from the federal level. We decided as a country a number of years ago now, I think it's back in the 1980s, early 1980s, we decided as a country that those individuals that are born with disabilities and the most vulnerable amongst us, so I've talked about that before today, is that the greatest thing we do is protect the most vulnerable. Those that have disabilities and are born with them, we have an obligation to protect them. And that has been agreed on by the federal government, the state government, and the local school districts. Everybody agrees on that. How does that get implemented? That's the tough one. And the tough one of talking about how does it work when your child is not where the services are located. Is that you, Lynette? We have this little deal in the legislature that when your phone goes off in a committee hearing, what happens, Greg? Candy, chocolate. Yeah. Chocolate the next day. I'm expecting chocolate for everybody tomorrow, Lynette. So going back to special education, we have an obligation, and we should have a desire to provide those services to children. Now, how do we do that? We want to provide those services in the least restrictive environment. But school districts don't always do that. In some cases, the least restrictive environment is in the home. Should the services be provided in the home? I believe they should. I believe they should be provided in a private school if a child is enrolled in a private school. I believe that our duty and responsibility to provide special education services to children is universal, and that it should be provided where the child is the most comfortable. Now, we're not there yet. And I will tell you that one of the huge responsibilities of the committee that I sit on, is to determine how we're going to do that in the future. Because we have this convoluted system that is, the best way to describe it is as evolutionary. We tried to fix a problem, we evolved into a policy, we tried to fix a problem, we evolved into a policy, and we've been doing that since the 1980s. And we've never done a good job of looking at it and saying, if we were to design a system from the ground up, and if we had these goals in mind to provide the services to the children that need them where they need them, how would that look? And our committee is charged with doing that. I can't tell you what the result will be on it, but I think it will look different than it does right now. And we are making a report in January of 27 to the legislature as a whole, and the legislature will be taking action on both school finance and special education. And I look forward to being part of that. I think it is critical to the education of our kids. And so I think I answered most of that question. As far as a short-term fix, the remedy in special ed right now is to file a grievance if you're not getting the services that you should have. It's not an easy process. Most people don't like going through that process. It's very difficult. We need to, long-term, fix the short-term as well. And so I wish I had better answers in some cases on that. The co-op system has some really good points to it. The co-op system has some really bad points to it in that it's not very flexible. I have visions in my head of something that works very different from what we have right now. We'll see how close we come to getting those implemented.
All right, here's another 3-question, or all still talking about education. A little bit of a statement at the beginning. I joined many Kansans in asking you to sustain the veto on House Sub for SB 244. As you know, the veto unfortunately was not sustained. My question is there ever a time when hearing an opposing viewpoint in legislation from constituents will cause you to change a vote? Is there a point of writing to you or any other Kansas legislator? And then I'm going to read all through their 3 questions. I am concerned about the Kansas legislators' waning interest in fully funding special education. This obligates school districts to take from regular ed budgets, shortening regular ed budgets, and ultimately special education students. Talk about your work on this bill. And then for the final part is, I appreciate your concern about education. You are equally concerned about Kansas's fall in health since the 90s. We are now ranked 29th in the nation. I believe we're actually 27th, thanks to the Kansas Health Foundation and their initiatives. But can you imagine that this might be, could we do the same thing for education rankings, is what they're asking.
I'll try to remember all of that. First of all, Senate Bill 244, I've already talked about it quite a lot. But the question was really more about, does it mean anything to write to a legislator? And I think that personal handwritten notes to a legislator are one of the most effective things you can do. What has happened, and I see Greg Wilson over here shaking his head up and down, and I would guess Clark would agree with this as well. By the way, I didn't introduce Greg. Greg Wilson's a representative from over at Abilene, represents my old house district. What we see all the time, and I will tell you the last week I've probably received at least 1,000 emails a day. My office assistant says I have 20,000 new emails in my box this last week. And the vast majority of those are a form email that comes from some organization that is using people's names. Probably, I'm not saying without their permission, I'm just saying they put their name at the bottom of it, and it actually comes from an organization. If you follow the email thread through, it doesn't even come from the individual. Because I've responded, when I was a new legislator, I started responding to all those, and I realized when I put the return to address, it wasn't even going to the person, it was going to an organization. And so then I started to look at them a little better. I don't think those are effective at all. I think people get jaundiced of them very quickly, and especially when the wording is exactly the same on every one of them. You end up just clicking by them. If I get an individually worded email, or even more amazing, if I get an individually worded snail mail that comes through the mail, those always get a response, or I try to always do a response to them. They mean something to me. That doesn't mean I will necessarily change a vote based off of one email or one letter, but I certainly pay attention to them, because it tells me that that person cared enough about it to write a note, or in the case of a bunch of pharmacists, cared about it enough to come and talk to me, which is even bigger. Make the trip down to Topeka. Schedule an appointment in my office, and even if you don't schedule an appointment, show up, and I'll try to fit you in. I'll try to give you 5-10 minutes of time. That means a whole bunch to me. Was there an education question in there?
The second part of that was about special education.
Special education.
Switching from taking from general education funds.
Yeah, well, and I have supported this, and I've voted for increasing special education funding, I don't know how many years now. But I think one of the things that's really challenging for the legislature right now is we have put a lot, and I've put exclamation marks around that, a lot of money into education. And last year and this year in particular, we're putting $100 million maybe into education, and all the rest of state government, we're actually cutting by that much to enable that to happen. And there is an end point in that. And we have worked hard to put money into education and not increase taxes. But you can't do that forever, because education amounts to about 2/3 of our state budget. On top of that 2/3, we have social services that amount to about another 15%. And so all of the rest of state government operates on less than 20% of our state budget. And it's one of the things when you're a freshman legislator and you go to Topeka, and you go to Topeka and you think you're going to make dramatic changes in the way things are done, and suddenly you realize that the amount of money that's available to do anything is relatively limited. And we have a policy that's called PAYGO, and I don't know where that name came from, but what it basically means is that if you want to add money to something, if you want to add $20 million to special education, you have to find a place to take it from. And let me tell you, that's pretty darn rough. It's pretty darn rough to look at constituents that have utilized a housing assistance subsidy, or have utilized a food subsistence subsidy, or free transportation, free public transportation. It's hard to look at those and say, hey, we're going to take $10 million from you and give it to education. And you can do that some, you can do that for a while, but there's an end to it. And the only logical end to continuing to put the amount of money we're putting into education is either find another income source or another revenue source, which means taxation, or grow our economy. Those are the two possibilities. And personally, I prefer the grow our economy side of that.
Thank you. There's a couple questions regarding more school funding. This one is talking about, because so much of our property tax is tied to school funding, do you believe Kansas needs to structure changes to the school financial system to achieve meaningful property tax relief? And which is a mill levy or a property appraisal cap?
Great question, and one of the things that is being debated right now in the legislature is, do we keep property tax down by holding the appraised value of our homes down, or do we keep property tax down by holding the mill levy down? And that's a trick question, by the way, because if you don't control both of them, you don't control property tax. And so really what happens is, the only way you get property tax reduced on a local level, I'm gonna differentiate between the two. On a local level, the only way you get property tax reduced is to keep budgets stable or falling. That is the only way you can reduce property tax for local units of government. Now, schools are a different story, because schools have three funding sources in the state, which really merge into two funding sources. One funding source is property tax. We have statewide a 20 mil property tax that funds education. Okay? Can we reduce that? Well, I think there is a way to reduce it, because the other funding source is a combination of sales and income tax. So can we increase the reliance on sales and income tax and reduce property tax? Yes, we can. But then that amounts to an increase in one of those two taxes or a decrease in services. And so it's a simple matter of mathematics. You have to have the money to do it, and then you have to decide where that money's going to go. Something that was floated this year in the legislature that's really interesting is a different approach and a different look at sales tax. And one of the things we have done over the history of our state is we start exempting entities from sales tax. And I'm sitting up here as a farmer, and I'm one of those entities. Farmers have been exempted from sales tax on machinery that they buy. Okay? And does that amount to money? Yes, it does. It's sales tax revenue that the state does not get. You know how many of those specific carve-outs there are in the state? It's getting close to 100 of specific sales tax carve-outs that we've said this person doesn't have to pay sales tax. We use it as an incentive for somebody to build a building. We say if you build that building, we won't charge you any sales tax on the materials to build that building. We use it as an incentive for an organization to do something we want them to. We say if you do whatever it is, then we won't charge you sales tax. What happens every time we do that is we narrow down that pool of people that pay sales tax. So there was a proposal that was in the legislature this year that, I don't know if it got a hearing or not, but a lot of people talked about it. It says, what if we charged a fee every time somebody made a transaction? They call it a transactional fee. How much money would that generate? And it's a surprising amount of money. And from a relatively, so we're talking about $1.60 fee, I think it was, wasn't it, Greg? Is that the number? And if we charged $1.60 every time we had a transaction in the state, how much money would that generate? Come to find out, the estimates that we saw said that it would eliminate all the property tax in the state to do that. So
It's $1.60 over $20.
over $20, yeah, you never paid more than $1.60.
7% up to 20.
Up to.
So yes, it would raise everything 20 or under 7%.
Yep.
But it adds up to an amazing amount.
It is an amazing amount. And one of the things that philosophically we have done in the history of our state and in the history of our nation is that we have consolidated tax bases down. We say, oh, this person is more able to pay taxes than this person over here. So we're gonna quit charging this person and we're gonna just rely on this person. And as we do that, as we reduce the base down, we end up putting an increasing burden on fewer people. And, you know, I don't know if anybody in here's had this discussion with me, but I've had this discussion about why shouldn't somebody that makes $1 million pay most of the tax? Well, the truth is they do. You know, you don't realize it, but the people that pay the most of the income tax are those that make the most money. And the idea that we should charge them more, although attractive on the surface, may result in actually less collection as they figure out ways to hide and shield their money. So, you know, I think the idea of a society is that we should share the burden as much as possible. So instead of trying to continually decrease the pool of people that pay taxes, I believe we should increase the pool and reduce the burden.
All right. And I hope that we answered that question. There was multiple parts there. Just finishing up, and I think this is something that relates to all of us, the affordable housing and the equitable housing access. I just don't know what your thoughts are on that. And is it truly that we don't have enough houses, or are people not getting paid enough to afford them?
I think the answer to the last part of that is yes and yes. It probably is true that we don't have enough houses that people want to live in. It's probably also true that we have a lot of people that can't afford a house. And what are we doing about it? Well, probably not enough. We passed a bill through the Senate the other day that was pretty neat bill. I supported it. I sat next to on the floor, I sat next to the sponsor of that bill. And he's from the Kansas City area. And so he looked at what causes increase in costs to build a house. And he visited with people that build houses and says, what increases these costs? And he went through them and tried to design a bill to reduce those costs. Well, some of those things are pretty near and dear to people's hearts. You know, zoning codes, size of a lot, you know, you don't think about it, but requiring somebody to have so many square feet in a lot before they can build a house on it actually increases the cost of that house. So some of the things that you look at is to try to go back and go, why do we have all of these regulations about how we build a house? And are there people out there that would prefer to not have that regulation and have a cheaper house? Kind of a cool thing, it's total aside to that, but we have a friend that wanted a house in Topeka so that they have a disabled husband and they're in the legislature and they want to live during the legislative session in Topeka so that they can take care of their husband. And she couldn't find anything affordable in Topeka that she could actually live in. And she found somewheres online that there's a company that wants to start building 3D houses. Has anybody heard of 3D houses? So, yeah, I got a shake of the head over here. It's really a cool concept. The machinery to start it up is kind of expensive, but it results in a cheaper house. And so I haven't got over to see it yet, but I think they got it built. And it'll be the first one built in the state of Kansas. And this machine comes in and it just starts doing like a 3D printer, goes around and builds the walls of the house. It's energy efficient. It's, in her case, she wanted something that wasn't very big, but was big enough for her and her husband. And, you know, those are some things we need to look at. Are there other ways out there that we can put to build a house for less than $250,000? You know, maybe, you know, yeah, I mean, those kind of ideas, I mean, we don't have any young people left in here, but yeah, well, yeah.
We have a student here, so I'm not going to take that.
Okay, so, yeah, we do. So young people want to be able to experience what it is to own a house. They should be able to. This is a huge part of the quote-unquote American dream, is that you have a house to live in that's yours. You have property. I mean, if you look at what distinguishes us from any other country in the world, one of the things that distinguishes us is private property rights. That you have the right to own something. And in many parts of the world, you never really own anything. And that is a huge part of what makes us unique as a nation.
All right,
Can I answer your question?
you did, and for those that didn't hear, in North Salina, there is actually a container home. I don't know how many of you tootle around North Salina, but there is a container home that was built last year there. This is not a question, but I think it's a great way to end. And first of all, I'd just like to thank everyone for showing a level of respect and just understanding and truly sitting here and listening and trying to have a conversation. I know everything matters, and especially so many things that are happening right now are so personal. So I just really want to tell you how much I appreciate the decorum of this room, and I hope everyone had the chance to get heard and they felt like their questions were answered and represented to the best of my ability and Senator Hill's. So with that, I'm going to say this isn't a question. Just wanted to say what a great job you are doing, and you really listen to your constituents.
Thank you.